I know two people who started out making almost the same money. The first one treats every small purchase like a major event. She clips coupons on Sunday. She drives across town to save 11 cents a gallon on gas. She feels a little stab of guilt every time she buys a coffee. And she can tell you to the dollar what she spent on groceries last week. By every measure our culture uses, she is the responsible one. The second person is the opposite with small stuff. He buys the coffee. He doesn't track his lunches. He tips well and never checks the price of the wine. If you watch them for a single day, you'd assume the careful one was getting rich and the relaxed one was a mess. 10 years later, the relaxed guy has several $100,000 more than she does, and here's the part that matters. The gap between them has almost nothing to do with coffee, coupons, or gas. It came from a handful of decisions you couldn't see on any given day. This is the thing nobody tells you about money. You have been pouring almost all of your attention into the loud, visible, everyday stuff that barely moves the needle, while the decisions that actually determine whether you build wealth are quiet, rare, and easy to ignore. Today I'm going to show you which ones actually matter, and the answer is going to feel almost lazy, because building real wealth is less about doing more clever things and more about not doing a few dumb ones. My name is Tom. This channel is real personal finance for normal people. No motivational fluff about hustling harder and no fantasy returns. We just look at what the math actually does over time. And the math here is going to surprise you because it says you can do less, worry about less, and end up with more. If that sounds like the kind of permission you've been waiting for, hit subscribe and stay with me. You've probably heard of the 80-20 rule. The idea is that a small slice of the causes drives most of the results. 20% of the effort produces 80% of the outcome. You see it everywhere once you look. You wear 20% of your clothes 80% of the time. A handful of roads carry most of the traffic in your city. It shows up in money too, and almost everyone who talks about it points it at the winners. They'll tell you that a few smart moves create most of your gains, and they spend the whole time hunting for those few magic moves. But here's the flip that changes everything, and it's the heart of this video. The 80-20 rule is even stronger on the losing side. A tiny number of mistakes cause the overwhelming majority of the financial damage in a person's life. Most people who never build wealth didn't fail because they missed some brilliant opportunity. They failed because they stepped on 2 or 3 financial landmines that blew up years of progress in a single moment. Which means building wealth is mostly a defense game. You don't get rich by being brilliant 100 times. You get rich by not being dumb the 4 or 5 times that actually count. Think of it like crossing a field with a few buried mines in it. You don't win that crossing with fancy footwork or by sprinting. You win it by taking calm, ordinary steps and not putting your foot on the wrong spot. That is the entire game. So let me show you exactly where the mines are buried. Because there are only a handful, and once you know where they are, you mostly just walk around them and get on with your life. Before I do, I want to name why this whole idea feels wrong, because it should feel wrong at first. Everything in our culture tells you that success comes from doing more. Hustle harder, optimize everything, track every dollar, find the next opportunity. And a huge industry makes money keeping you busy because busy people buy products, pay for advice, and trade often. Doing less feels lazy, almost irresponsible, like you're not taking it seriously. But money is one of the rare areas of life where effort and results can actually point in opposite directions. The person frantically managing every penny is often the one stepping on mines, while the person who set things up once and walked away is quietly winning. Once you accept that, the pressure lifts, and the real work turns out to be small. The first mine, and the one that ruins the most people, is carrying high interest debt. I'm talking about credit cards above all. Here's why this one is so deadly. Everything good about investing comes from compounding, which is your money growing on top of its own growth, snowballing bigger every year. High interest debt is that exact same engine running in reverse, except it's pointed at you. The average credit card right now charges somewhere around 22%. So if you carry a $6,000 balance, you're handing the car company about $1,300 a year in interest alone before you've paid down a single dollar of what you actually bought. And it compounds against you. There are people making minimum payments on a $5,000 balance who will be paying it off for over 20 years and hand the bank nearly $8,000 in interest along the way. Now flip it around. That same $6,000, if it were invested instead of owed, would grow to over $23,000 in 20 years. So every dollar trapped in credit card debt is costing you twice. It bleeds you at 22% on one side while it robs you of the growth it could have earned on the other. This is the first mine you defuse before investing, before anything fancy. There is no investment on earth that reliably beats a guaranteed 22%, and paying off that card is exactly that. You don't have to be sophisticated, you just have to refuse to step on this one. The second mine is the one that gets the people who are actually trying. It's bailing out when the market drops. Here's what happens. Someone does everything right, they save, they invest, and then the market falls 20 or 30%. Their stomach drops, the news is screaming, and they sell to make the pain stop. They lock in the loss and then sit in cash, too scared to get back in, and they miss the recovery that almost always follows. There's a firm called Morningstar that measures this every year, and the finding is remarkably consistent. The average investor earns roughly 1.25% less per year than the very funds they're invested in. Read that again. They underperform the funds they own because of when they choose to jump in and out. 1.25% a year sounds tiny, but on $100,000 over 20 years, that gap is more than $130,000 left on the table, about a fifth of what you should have had. And here's the most beautiful part for our purposes. The same research found that the people who traded the most and panicked the most had the worst results, while the people who barely touched their accounts captured nearly everything their funds earned. The winning move was to do nothing, not check, not tweak, not react. The market crash isn't actually the thing that hurts you. Selling during the crash is. So the defense here is almost comically simple. When the market falls, you do less, ideally nothing. And it helps to understand why your brain fights you on this. Researchers have found that the pain of losing money hits us about twice as hard as the pleasure of gaining the same amount. So when your account is bleeding, every instinct you have is screaming at you to make it stop, and selling makes it stop. That instinct kept your ancestors alive, but it's financial poison, because it fires hardest at the exact moment you should be sitting still. Knowing that the panic is just old wiring, not wisdom, is half the battle. The third mine is one most people don't even see coming, and it disguises itself as found money. It's cashing out your retirement account when you change jobs. This happens constantly. Studies show that more than 4 in 10 people, when they leave a job, cash out their 401k instead of moving it along to keep growing. And of the people who cash out, about 90% drain the entire thing. The reason is psychological. When your employer matched your contributions, the balance starts to feel like a bonus. Like lottery winnings rather than your own retirement, so it feels okay to spend it, but the math is brutal. If you cash out $25,000 before retirement age, the government takes income tax plus a 10% penalty. So you might walk away with around $17,000 of it. You lit thousands on fire for the privilege, but that's not even the real cost. That $25,000, if you'd simply left it alone until retirement, would have grown to roughly $190,000. So cashing out a $25,000 account isn't a $25,000 decision. It's a $190,000 decision, made in an afternoon, usually to buy something you won't remember in 5 years. The defense is one sentence. When you leave a job, you never cash out the retirement account. You roll it over and forget it exists. If you've stepped on one of these, by the way, don't beat yourself up. Just stop standing on it. And I'm curious which one hit home, so drop a comment and tell me which of these mines you stepped on. Because I promise you are not the only one. The fourth mine is quieter and it wears a suit. It's paying for complexity. The financial industry makes its money convincing you that your money needs to be managed. That you need an expert picking clever investments. That simple isn't enough. So people pay for actively managed funds and advisors who promise to beat the market. Here's what the data actually says. There's a scorecard called SPIVA that's tracked this for over 20 years, and over any 15-year stretch, around 90% of these professionally managed stock funds fail to beat a plain, boring index fund that just owns the whole market and does nothing. 90%. And for the privilege of losing to the simple option, you pay them more. A typical active fund or advisor might charge 10 to 25 times the fee of an index fund. Let me show you what that costs. Put $100,000 in a boring index fund for 30 years, and the rock bottom fees barely touch it. Put it with a 1% advisor over that same stretch, and the fee quietly eats around $178,000 of your final balance. You paid a small fortune to do worse than the option that required no thought at all. The defense, once again, is to do less. Own the simple thing, pay almost nothing, and stop hunting for the genius who's going to beat the market. Because the odds say he'll lose to a fund your grandmother could have picked. And I want to be fair here, because this mine is the hardest to see. Hiring an expert feels like the responsible, grown-up thing to do. It feels like the opposite of a mistake. That's exactly why it works on smart, careful people. The industry sells the idea that markets are scary and complicated and you shouldn't go in there alone. And then it charges you a percentage of everything you own every single year for the privilege of underperforming. A 1% fee sounds trivial, almost polite. But it's 1% of your entire balance, every year, in good years and bad. Forever, and it compounds against you exactly the way the credit card balance did. Small number, enormous bite. The fifth mine is the slowest and the sneakiest, and it's lifestyle inflation. This is the one where every time you get a raise, your spending quietly rises to swallow it. New job, nicer apartment. Bigger paycheck, bigger car. The raise vanishes into your lifestyle and your savings rate never actually moves. So 10 years and several raises later, you're earning way more and saving about the same. What makes it dangerous is that it never feels like a mistake because each individual upgrade seems reasonable. The defense isn't to live like a monk. It's just to do less with each raise than you're tempted to. When more money comes in, let your life inflate a little, but send a good chunk of every raise straight past your spending and into your investments before you ever get used to it. Keep the gap between what you earn and what you spend widening, instead of letting it snap shut every time you get ahead. Now here's a bonus, because there's one quiet move that keeps you off several of these mines at the same time, and it's having a small pile of cash set aside for emergencies. Think about why people step on the debt mine or the cash out mine in the first place. The car breaks, the roof leaks, the job disappears, and there's no cushion. So they reach for the credit card or they drain the retirement account, because it's the only money available. A buffer of even a few $1,000s takes those bad options off the table. In fact, that same research on retirement cash outs found that people with just $2,000 in emergency savings were dramatically less likely to raid their 401k when they hit a rough patch. The cushion isn't exciting and it isn't an investment, but it's the thing that stops a normal-sized problem from forcing you onto one of the big mines. It's defense for your defense. So that's the minefield: high-interest debt, panic selling, cashing out retirement, paying for complexity, and lifestyle inflation with a cash cushion guarding the whole field. Notice something about that entire list? Not one of them is about being clever. Every single defense was some version of do less, wait, leave it alone, don't touch it, don't react. And that's not a coincidence because of the way the math is built. Let me show you the asymmetry, because this is the part that should change how you spend your energy. Good financial moves add up slowly and in a straight line. You save a little, it grows a little, and over many years it compounds into something real. But mistakes don't work in a straight line. They subtract fast and they compound against you. Here's the proof. If you save $500 a month for 10 straight years, a genuinely disciplined decade, you build about $86,000. That's the reward for 10 years of doing the right thing over and over. Now remember that single retirement cash out we talked about, the one that quietly cost $190,000 in future value. One bad afternoon erased more than a decade of discipline. That's the whole reason defense beats offense in money. One mine can undo years of careful walking. So the highest return thing you can possibly do isn't finding a better investment. It's removing the mines. And this is why chasing better returns is mostly a trap. People spend enormous energy trying to squeeze an extra 1 or 2% out of their investments, hunting for the perfect fund or the perfect moment. But an extra 2% on a modest portfolio is a few $100s a year, while a single one of these mines costs you tens or hundreds of thousands. You're stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. The person who earns an ordinary return but never blows up will run circles around the person chasing brilliant returns who steps on a mine every few years. Boring and intact beats brilliant and cratered every single time. I learned this the slow way. For years, I thought building wealth meant doing more. I tracked every category. I tweaked my investments constantly. I read about hot sectors and moved money around chasing them. I felt productive. And all that activity was actually the problem. It was just more chances to step on a mine. The person I know who's done this best is my neighbor Paul. And the funny thing about Paul is that he has no story. There's no big win, no perfect stock, no clever timing. He just never carried a credit card balance, never panicked and sold, never cashed out an account, never paid some manager to lose his money slowly, and never let his lifestyle eat his raises. He played pure defense for 30 years and ended up wealthy by accident, or at least it looks like accident from the outside. My friend Marcus stepped on a couple of these mines in his life, learned the hard way, and these days he's calm about it. He'll tell you himself that getting rich turned out to be mostly about getting out of his own way. So when I say build wealth by doing less, I mean it almost literally. Stop pouring your energy into the loud 80%, the coupons and the coffee guilt and the gas station math, because that stuff barely matters. Spend one quiet afternoon dealing with the few things that do. Kill the high interest debt. Set your investments up so they happen automatically and you can't panic sell on a bad day. Promise yourself you'll never cash out a retirement account. Put your money in something simple and cheap. And the next time you get a raise, send most of it past your lifestyle. Diffuse those 5 mines once, and then genuinely go live your life. Buy the coffee. The coffee was never the problem. The mines were. That's the real 80/20 of money. A few decisions, made calmly and then left alone, determine almost everything. And everything else is noise you've been told to obsess over. The wealthy people I know aren't optimizing their grocery receipts. They're just not standing on any of the mines. And they're spending the energy everyone else wastes on the small stuff actually enjoying their lives. You can do the same thing starting today, and it'll feel less like work, not more. If this reframed how you think about money, go watch my video on letting your money quietly compound while you do nothing. Because it's the natural other half of this idea. Drop a comment telling me which mine you've stepped on, hit subscribe so the next one finds you, and I'll see you in the next video.